Welcome everyone to the RMW Commerce webinar, Unboxing Your Future. We're gonna preview a couple of things here. Today, we're talking supply chain, and I'm super excited to do so. This is the first in a number of new video content that we're producing here at RMW Commerce. And in particular, we're talking not just any supply chain, we're talking mid-market supply chain. So as a brand, as you grow, what happens? How do you grow without trouble? Look, really, there's no way to grow without trouble, but there's always going to be something that we're worried about here. I'm joined here with a co-host, Vinny O'Brien, who is going to be sort of an informal moderator here. Welcome, Vinny.
Hey, Rick, how's it going?
I'm doing great.
Thanks for having me on.
Happy for everyone to be in today. I really want to make this fun and interactive. If you have questions, don't feel shy. Vinny and I, we don't bite much or not very hard. If you have questions, I would love to learn where you're from. Thanks, Robert. Dialing in. Do they say dialing in anymore? Is that a thing, Vinny?
It is if you're dialing in from the 80s. So yeah, for some people it's going to be.
Okay.
We accept faxes too, don't worry.
This stream is coming to you from a 300 baud modem. So the bits really just come in down the wire one at a time. But anyway, the report that we're talking about today is actually pretty exciting. It is called Unboxing Your Future, Successful Retail in a Post-COVID Era. And there are a number of different, as we kind of look at the contents of the report that we're going to be reviewing today, there are a few different things. This really sort of takes us on a journey from where the heck have we been sort of pre-COVID, during COVID, and now coming off of what you might call the COVID hangover. And so would love to talk about that a little bit. And as it's really the story of this report is the story of a growing brand. And as a mid-market brand, you're not big enough to have tons of your own facilities, dialed in operations, everything, but you're also not a small and medium business either. And so generally the lines for this somewhere, I would say from a parcel count point of view, comes in between, I would say 10,000 parcels a month, anywhere up to 100,000, 150,000 parcels a month, could be up to 200,000 parcels a month. That's kind of the mid-market range that we're looking at here. Again, there are a lot of people who start out on, whatever SaaS e-commerce platform you're comfortable with, but then as they grow, what are the challenges that I experience? That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Great. So look, Rick, one of the things that maybe you can do for us and for me as well is just kind of set the scene a little bit, if you don't mind. D2C is tricky, which we know it's been the darling of e-com for so long and of retail, and scaling it's proven even more difficult, particularly in 2023. We know that profitability is becoming a challenge for people and it's drawing a huge amount of spotlight. So I think trying to get to that profitability point is going to be key next year, and rightly so. So what I want to kind of get from you at this point is maybe lay of land. Where do we find ourselves in 2023? How is the overall landscape? And kind of how did we get here?
Yeah. How we got here is a little bit complicated. So to do that, we kind of have to go back really the last 10 years. And some of the beginnings of this is really the beginnings of like, how did the Federal Reserve and the United States restart the economy after the last recession? You almost have to go back that part because interest rates have been almost literally zero since 2013 or something like that. That has greatly goosed investment, both SaaS companies and direct consumer brands. Investors have really, put money into the market like there's no tomorrow. And companies have raised money like there's no tomorrow too. And the main reason for this is if you can take money, why not? You could always just raise another round in a couple of years. And as long as the money is more or less free, why not keep doing that? So that's kind of the good old days. And that really, I would say that kind of attitude really continued all the way through 2019. And COVID really put this on supercharge. And so I would love to hear, like, if anyone in the audience has their own stories of like what happened when COVID hit. Probably, I know I heard, and you probably did as well, Vinny, a lot of people who had their stores during COVID immediately set up e-commerce sites. Why not?
It's easy. Everyone's doing it.
Everyone's doing it. And if I believe all those drop shipping YouTube videos, I can be a millionaire. You could be a millionaire.
I get mine from Twitter, but there you go. Tell me, has it created something of a false economy for us?
I think, look, the short answer is yes. We had a lot of business models which had really no business being here, for lack of a better term. And that really, post-COVID, that really came to an end due to a number of events that all kind of happened around the same time. I would say as we kind of moved into 2021 and then into 2022, when really kind of the end of the good times really started, Apple happened to make customer acquisition costs much higher for all direct-to-consumer brands because they made it harder for Facebook to track everyone. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg was super frowny face when that happened, and they had to rebuild their entire targeting and tracking algorithm. A couple of other things, during COVID, manufacturing and supply chains were all busted up. It was very hard to get new inventory to compensate for all the demand. So a lot of people over ordered. And then as we got into 2022, the Ukraine war started. If anyone remembers that, it's still going on. And at the same time, the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates, which immediately rippled through the venture capital community. And so those things returned to, started to, have serious problems from a backdrop point of view. How did that hit consumers? Supply chain costs kept increasing. Economy, inflation started rising because of cost of supply chain, cost of labor, and retailers needed to move from a D2C or e-commerce only realm into more of an omni-channel realm. And so that's kind of the starting point there.
And one of the things that strikes me as you're saying that is we have all these external forces, things that are not in our control that were impacting us. And it really brings home to like the inexperienced people who were getting into e-com were not able to control the things that they could control, which kind of is a bit of a perfect storm of things where you've got the external forces and then you're not aware of the things you should be doing yourself. So it really culminated in this pretty challenging situation for people. So coming out of 2023, where do you find people?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in general, people are constrained by profitability, and that's what investors are rewarding today. And so just getting off the Walmart earnings call literally this morning, they're probably one of the best positioned companies in the US to deal with a constrained economy where consumers' discretionary income is being squeezed. They've always been known as a value brand. They did something really interesting at the beginning of the year. I mean, just as an example, is they said that we're going to grow operating, like in the situation where consumers aren't growing overall dollars because savings is constrained. What do we want to do? We want to grow our operating income, i.e. our profitability, faster than our sales. And so that's really the backdrop that we're dealing with now is we can't grow sales for its own sake anymore. Investors are expecting your bottom line to actually grow. It's not that they don't care about your top line anymore, but they're expecting your bottom line to grow faster than your top line. And in particular, if you give an investor a goal, they're going to hold you, even if you're like, well, my top line, consumers, discretionary, blah, blah, blah. You start using like waving your hands a lot. And then they're going to point to your bottom line. And I'm like, you still signed up for this number. That's kind of where I think that people are starting from right now.
And it's kind of interesting because Walmart have this I suppose they have the opportunity to get to do things differently because of their size and their scale. So it sounds to me like they were someone who was in control of the things that they were in control of, so they could make very smart choices, and they've backed them, and now they're seeing the result. But if you're not in control of that, if you're sitting down there and you're not able to make these decisions, there's going to be a lot of operators out there, brands who are hurting, and they're hurting across a number of fields simultaneously. So
Yeah.
how do you start planning into next year, and how do you start getting into assessing just where that need is for your brand or for your business?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good question. I think the answer to this question starts getting into the meat of the report, which is, as you start growing, what are the biggest challenges that you start dealing with, and in response to consumer expectations. So consumers expect that if you tell them an item is in stock, it's going to stay in stock. They expect you to have a great experience from the unboxing point of view, better than Amazon, who just gives you a plain brown box. Obviously, if you're a direct consumer brand and value the experience someone gets when they work with your brand, that's super important. And then look, as you're growing, you're not a small and medium business anymore. You need to do all that in a way where your costs do not scale linearly with your growth. And I think that's really the hardest part of supply chain. If you look at any retailer, and I talked about this on the podcast actually last week, you can't you can't actually handle the fact that if you ship a new parcel, your costs can't keep increasing. And so you really want to gain leverage on your supply chain. And I think that's where a lot of the needs come from.
Yeah, I like that you've kind of talked about some of the softer sides of that whole customer experience as well, because we've all had that iPhone experience, or most of us will have had, where you've got the 32 seconds it takes to open up the box, but it's really an extension of the brand. And I think that's a really important part that a lot of people probably didn't consider. But you've also talked about complexity within organizations to a degree there. How do you start picking that apart? What are the things that you can start doing to understand the complexity that exists? And what are the key questions that you can start asking yourself in the search for solutions at this point?
Yeah, I think as we start to look at the complexity and the problems that we're trying to solve, people are trying to solve a number of different problems. And really the first two items that we talk about in the report are inventory accuracy, which is historically a problem. Look, you could have accurate inventory in your store, but then when you get to the shelf, that's a different situation, because you have a shelf, you have a warehouse, there are aisles, there are specific locations that specific items are supposed to be. And if they're not there when you go to pick, then what you have is a stock out. And so inventory accuracy is always a huge concern, because you spent all this money to acquire the customer, and now you need to cancel the order. Second is scaling and workforce issues, particularly for a growing business. It's usually one of the first things that breaks. So like, can you predict what your demand is going to be? And then how do you know how much staff needs to be on certain days and certain shifts as your demand spikes over the years? Can you hire people? Can you train them? Do they all have the same service level? Do they not? It's very hard to manage this as a growing business. And I think those are sort of the additional things. Clearly, there are other items that people caring about: access to newer channels. How do you deal with unboxing at scale? And we'll talk about some of these things as we kind of go through some of the items in the report.
Yeah, and they're all pretty fundamental questions to a degree. But we take an example, say, of a brand who's grown really quickly through COVID, and now they find themselves in this new world. What kind of decisions are they making that are different? Because you kind of talked about order volumes and some of the considerations along those points. At what point does a brand need to start considering these alternative options?
Yeah, and so let's start introducing, like, what are these alternative options? how, we talked a little bit about some of the things that they're looking for: customization, support for additional channels. As they start looking for different options, they're starting to ask themselves like harder questions, like, how do we deal with not just sort of one of these problems at a time, but how can we solve all these problems at the same time? And so I find that people come from a couple of different situations. One is they come from, they moved out of their garage. They're in a local 3PL. That local 3PL that's maybe in their neighborhood or in their city, that's scaled to a certain point. And now they're the biggest customer in that 3PL, which is usually, it's not a great place to be, because number one is you're likely to become space constrained. And then second, as part of being space constrained is you need to think about other solutions. And so now we're trying to think about like, okay, do I build a facility? If I have a lease that I'm dealing with, how do I expand? But I need different facilities beyond what my current lease can offer me. And so you're talking about some kind of hybrid solution between in-source and outsource fulfillment that's managed through the same set of software, which gives you access to better rates and better capabilities, at the same time.
And one of the kind of the challenges I think amongst all this are kind of the key thing that e-commerce exposed is that you're exposed to all these issues if you get them wrong, because it's so customer facing. It's different if I walk into a store and the product I want is not on the shelf. I'm just going to pick an alternative. I'm not going to jump on Twitter and tell everyone how annoyed I am that I didn't get what I want when it should have been there. But can you maybe start describing to me, I guess, some of what these solutions might be? So the logistics and supply chain is a really tough area for most people to get their heads around, me included. So can you dumb it down for me a little bit? But I also found in kind of talking to you about it that there is a difference between logistics and supply chain itself. Can you distinguish the two for us as well during your answer?
Yeah, no problem. Look, there are only so many solutions to these problems, and they all have different pros and cons. So I think as we talk about, the different solutions, and we talk about this in the report, is first thing you do, like, you need more volume, hire more people. That's kind of step one. That's the first thing that everyone usually tries. And so where is that a challenge is, first of all, these people have to be available in the market. You need to be able to hire them to a certain standard. You need to teach them what to do, and they need to do it efficiently. And so that's a big challenge. Can you do this on your own? Second is obviously outsourcing to a local provider, which usually you can get them to do the certain things that you want to do, but they don't necessarily have the volume, scale, professionalism that some of the larger providers, like maybe a Geodis or an Amazon, might offer, and may not have the footprint that you want to actually put inventory in the locations across the country that you want. In terms of, yeah.
Could I just ask you a question? Because one of the things I come across frequently is that's not how our brand does it. So there's this whole area of trust that has got to be there. How do you think we overcome that part of it?
Yeah, look, the trust is one of the hardest parts of supply chain, because, and this is something that I think a lot of people who have been sort of technology oriented and then tried to get into fulfillment don't understand. And I actually talked about this. I interviewed the CEO of ShipBob on my podcast last week, and he actually started as a brand owner before they started ShipBob. One of the things that they that Drew said to me was, as a small and medium business, you're investing all of your money in your inventory, all the capital you have, and then you are guarding that with your life. Because if that, God forbid, a building catches on fire or something, your business is literally up in smoke. And so trusting that to another provider is a huge risk. It's not just like switching e-commerce platforms easier, that's much easier than like trusting someone with your inventory. And so I think the fact that you have so much capital tied in with this solution, you want someone to treat your inventory like you would yourself. And that's probably how I would put some of the trust factor, as regards to it.
Yeah, and you described it really well. That's also your second pun of our discussion, the business to business, and then oof, I can't imagine what it's going to be by the end. But I mean that trust factor bridges a lot of gaps. If you can overcome that, it's kind of a good point to get to. But when you're outsourcing, what are the other things that this offers to you? Like, what are the other, I suppose, economic implications for your business?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you're going to a global 3PL, then that's another option that will actually probably lower your rates. At the same time, that'll also give you capabilities, but most of the big 3PLs, you have to learn how to integrate with EDI, which is, very foreign to people who grew up in sort of a SaaS e-commerce world. They're like, what is this EDI thing? How do I figure it out? There are providers that will help you with this, but it's not the easiest
More
thing to think about.
speak, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love the 80s as much as anything else. It's like, and we could have Cyndi Lauper coming up or something with, girls just want to have fun. But, I think if you talk about 3PLs, especially the big global 3PLs, look, if you're shipping with Amazon MCF, I'm just going to use one example, which is Amazon's white box solution. It's great if your customization requires that you like that white box. But if you want to do anything else, it's not really an option. And I'm sure, look, they have a lot of this on this roadmap, but now you have a different system that's not as customizable as your local 3PL. And so that's one option. A lot of times, as someone gets into 10,000 parcels a month, people also start telling them, well, you need a WMS. And so then that becomes a challenge. You look around the WMSs, they all cost over $100,000. They all take over 6 months to implement on a good day. They've never done anything like that in their career. And so then that becomes sort of another challenge to overcome.
Yeah, and it's a weird one because I think we've always looked at e-com success as business growth or new orders on the table, and it feels increasingly like the area we're moving into now is about bringing efficiency through an organization. And I think we're not calling that cost cutting, it's genuine efficiency. So we're talking about process efficiency here. We're talking about cost reduction. Access to rates, I think, is something that, as someone who moves parcels every day, I know how important that is to us. So to me, this kind of feels like it's a viable solution. But what I guess my kind of follow on to that is, are there other upsides that we should be looking at, or is this new upside in terms of efficiency, is that the new sexy in e-com? Have we just coined a term?
Look, I think, I certainly don't believe I coined efficiency, but I do believe that profitability is really the new sexy at this point. And you're trying to do a whole bunch of things at the same time. You're trying to add the capability to go to new channels, including international, at the same time. So not just to your store, not just to your website. You're going to multiple marketplaces. You're dealing with wholesale. So you're maybe selling to Target and Walmart or local retailers. At the same time, you're trying to place inventory closer to the consumer. So you need access to multiple facilities, potentially across the country. At the same time, your volume is increasing. And by the way, you're trying to do this in a way that gives you leverage on your P&L. And so really the combination of all those factors at the same time, and it makes it very hard to really do all those things at the same time and find a solution that is low capital investment. It's very easy to turn on and onboard, has your standards, reduces costs. The requirements keep piling up. And some of it, like helping companies think about what are their requirements? How do I evaluate solutions? How do I know if a certain solution provider is a good fit or not a good fit? That was really part of the whole genesis of this report.
So it kind of feels like one of the areas that you've zoned in on is the kind of the step in maturity. So I've been a growing brand all these days. Now the way I need to think about myself is I need to think, what would an established brand do? And we see a lot of it in the media today. Like Shein have kind of made steps, and they're proving that this business model works. But is how do I get myself as quickly as possible from being that kind of new age brand to becoming an established brand in terms of mindset and thinking around
Wow.
this topic?
Great question. And, that's certainly one of the things I talk about in defining what this new category is. And look, this entire report stemmed from a relationship that I had with ShipBob, where they commissioned essentially a study on this new category of solutions. There's obviously, everyone knows about WMS, everyone knows about 3PLs, everyone knows about 4PLs, but people need more than all of those things put together. They need leverage on their bottom line at the same time. And so, to the extent that you're finding solutions, what we're trying to do is help companies evaluate those solutions well. And RMW Commerce, basically being an independent analyst from this point of view, is I envision the fact that there is this category of solutions that are not like enterprise solutions, and they're also not like SMB solutions. And so I thought that this really needed a new term in the market. And the term that I coined for this is really fulfillment accelerator. The reason why you need to scale as quickly as possible is because the market isn't static. And so the big holding, like if you're in CPG, the Unilevers, and you have big corporate competitors that see what you're doing. If you're, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 parcels a month, you're not a fad anymore. And so you've passed product market fit. And so as a result, your solution needs really change.
So apart from giving us an exclusive on the fulfillment accelerator, which I loved when I read this, it's trying to figure out what are the requirements that I need to look for if I'm going out looking for a fulfillment accelerator. Given that you spent time in the report and building out this vision, what do I need to look for?
Yeah, so I think even before I get to specific requirements, I want to make sure people realize they're not just looking for software, and they're not just looking for facilities. They're looking for a number of things together. They need capabilities. Of course, you need capabilities, and capabilities are always the combination of people, process, and technology working together to achieve some solution. But then you also need expertise, because you're coming from, as you're growing, an SMB world, and you're starting to compete with enterprise players. And so you need to work with a set of solution providers that know more than you do. And so, kind of going back to the previous situation where you're working with a mom and pop 3PL, if you're the largest customer in that facility, that's usually what I find that's actually bad news for you as a growing provider, because you need to scale to where the enterprise is. And if your facility provider has never actually done that before, then I think that's a big challenge for you. So as we kind of look to the specific requirements, I really outline, just 7, 8 easy steps. No, here are all the things that you're looking for, and I have it up on the report. And by the way, if you have not downloaded the report yet, I do have the link to it in the comments. It was one of the first comments here. You can still get it. Inventory management, particularly omni-channel inventory management, I think is important. As a small and medium business, you don't have access to great rates. Getting access to rates that the big boys and girls have access to, I think is really amazing. Low capital requirements, I think it's important. Like, you can't afford to spend hundreds of thousands to get a WMS or millions to build a facility. That's just not the capital you have. Throughput is table stakes. Day definite delivery, in this day and age, it's table stakes. Omni-channel, table stakes. Some of the requirements that people forget about are like customization. Not every SKU and category needs the same things in the box. That's how I think about that. You might want to give specific inserts to new customers as to your best premium customers. And can your facility execute that? And so, to me, the best solutions in the supply chain world for the winning brands understand that you create loyalty not just through things you produce digitally, you also produce them physically by things that you give your customers in the box to let them know that you're appreciated, you're a valued member of the family, whatever brand you were in.
Yeah, I used to love that in my eBay days. It was one of the areas that people were probably most inventive over any other category I've ever worked in. I like the global by default uh, tag as well, because increasingly as growth rates are stopping in countries, we're going to find a lot more people having to take that leap and make to jump into global, probably with a lot more speed than they imagine, I think, over the next 18 months or so as well. But one of the things that kind of jumps out at me as you describe it, Rick, is that we're going to have to start talking to people in a more consultative approach when we're looking at partners to come in here. And that probably offers a range of other benefits other than the things we actually need. Like there's a lot of expertise that goes with that. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, you used a word there that I really like, which is consultative. And I think it's a big challenge for a lot of people. Many people grew up in a world where there's an adversarial relationship with your vendor. Like, oh, I'm going to do an RFP and I'm really going to beat them up on price. And the thing that happens when you beat someone up on price to an extreme degree is now you're not treating them like a partner. You're treating them like a vendor or someone who is sort of lower than you. When supply chain is literally in the word, it's about the chain, and the chain is connected between you and your consumer. And so if you want to beat up part of your chain, you're really only hurting yourself. And I think that consultative relationship from the beginning of like, what are my plans for next year? When are going to be my peak periods? What are my peaks going to look like? What experience is what's going to be my consumer experience that I'm going to promise from an unboxing point of view? In what channels do I need this product? How close to the consumer do I need these products? So I think all these things I think are important. And if you have a number of partners, some software providers, some logistics providers, which are usually, to answer your earlier question, the logistics providers tend to be the more physical things, like your shelving and your pick lines and your sorters and anything that's happening, your trucks. Whereas the supply chain is really sort of the combination of the entire thing, which includes sort of those physical logistics capabilities. And so those are some of the exciting things, I think.
No, it's really interesting because the adversarial part that I completely get. I mean, I've been in that role probably wrongly over the years. But the one thing I would say it forces you to do is think along the idea of a roadmap. So it really forces you to have the discipline to sit down and say, have I really thought this through? And if not, you almost kind of got to walk away from the table and go figure those things out again. But I love that idea that it forces you to think through a roadmap, because you've described people, process, technology, and all of a sudden this goes beyond the question you had around last mile delivery, which is the essence to me of what this supply chain discussion is really about.
Yeah, and I think retail earnings are showing that. Why did Target just have a big profitability beat yesterday? Their number one key was inventory. What's the number one thing that Walmart talked about this morning in their earnings? Our inventory is down and it's closer to consumers. We're increasing how we can use our stores as hubs, which clearly, if you're a mid-market brand, not everyone can do. But the closest thing you can do is be in multiple facilities across the country that puts you closer to consumers. That means that your last mile costs, which usually make up between 40 and 50% of your entire supply chain budget, are actually less because you don't have to ship it across the country. I mean, it still drives me crazy as a supply chain expert. When I order something from a website, I'm in New York City and it's shipping from California. I'm like, are we in 2023 or what's happening here? There are better solutions to this problem. And it seems like we're still not solving it well.
Yeah, it's also another point that maybe not is in the report as such, but it strikes me that if you're a brand and you're looking to grow, that distribution is going to be key to your ability to do that. So the areas that you're going to win over the next few years are in solving your distribution challenge, which is availability in a lot of different places, omni-channel, as you said, and global as standard. And really, there aren't too many other ways we can grow as e-com businesses. So getting this decision right and this choice right is going to be key. So look, we've talked about the positives to it. Are there any concerns that we should be thinking of? What are the red flags maybe you should be thinking about going through this thought process for yourself?
Yeah, look, I there's always upsides and downsides to any kind of evaluation. I think as you look at these things, your partners, making sure that your partners are on the same side of the table as you from an operator mentality. They understand what it means for stock outs to happen. They understand what it means for you to have lost inventory. And so anyone who's been in e-commerce, here's about 3PLs. If you go on Twitter for 5 minutes and search for 3PL, pretty much it's going to be like a horror story. And so that's really the first thing that comes to mind as you evaluate these things. People have been burned by a 3PL before, and even you brought it up as a question earlier, is they're worried about the lack of control. And so they want to like hold on to their inventory with both hands. And that's, I think I have in the report some questions that I would really, as you're evaluating, ask every provider you talk to. But really, there are only a couple of key questions that I look for people to focus on. And pretty much all of the questions that you're going to ask under that really fall under these banners. One is like, how can I trust you? And show me examples and proof. Ask for references. Follow up. You can't imagine how many people don't actually talk to references. They get references from like, oh, they have references. You would be shocked by how many bad references I have spoken with. You ask them very simple questions like, do you use the provider? And they say no. I mean, this is company provided references at major platforms. So having conversations, understanding, is the reference like you? Are they in a similar category? Do they have a similar volume profile? What is their customer service experience? All those things I think are so super important. And the report, details some of these questions and more I think for people that are diving in.
Yeah, reading through the questions, it reads like relationship advice. Like, can I trust another provider? I've had my heart broken in the past. When will I outgrow this provider? I can see where your head was when you're writing this, but in all honesty, the reason I mention that is this has got to be a human thing, right? With all the technology, everything we have, this is really about people to people and understanding the nuance that only talking to somebody can bring is really what I'm getting from it as we look through it.
Yeah, I think this is, if you can't be with the one you love, then love the one you're with. So can you trust your provider? Do you have a relationship that could actually improve so that you don't have to get divorced later? Like, are we going to continue this metaphor? I'm a little
Next week
confused here.
next week we're going to be decoding 80s love songs over a glass of Pinot Noir and whatever you're having yourself. Look, let's have a look into what the fulfillment accelerator and its place into our future, because look, the rate of change in our industry is breakneck speed, right? So we've got to make decisions in a vacuum sometimes. But what I liked about COVID and the pandemic, which no one has ever said, was that we made decisive decisions with limited enough information, but we stuck to them and we weren't afraid of making the decision. So I think we've got a framework for kind of decision making. But how does the fulfillment accelerator look in 2024 and beyond? What do you see its place in our world?
Yeah, I think from a future point of view, there are a number of capabilities that will keep being added to this kind of solution, because I think in the past, what you had is you were forced to go with sort of like one solution or another, and the flexibility to leverage perhaps like more than one provider from the same set of software at a low and reasonable cost structure those are probably three of the most important criteria. It's harder. And I think a common set of software will help you do that. So I think international capabilities, cross-border at first as you test the demand, but then cross-border has like I spent 3 years in the cross-border industry. Cross-border has a maturity curve. As those foreign markets get more mature, you're going to want to land inventory in those segments where you have pockets of more demand to reduce your cost structure, to improve the buyer experience, all these things. I think improved personalization, gift wrap is super important. Distributed order management, particularly like connecting to omni-channel scenarios, is super important as you like add your own stores. In addition, like for instance, usually a lot of times you're starting out with wholesale. That's usually one of the first channels after DTC and marketplaces. But then, you know, brands like Allbirds, Bonobos, Warby Parker, plenty of brands have added Hoka, added DTC as they go along. Being able to connect to those situations, more advanced kitting and customization, I believe over the next year or two will become more important criteria. And then specialized facilities. So temperature control, heavy bulky items, a lot of the sort of national 3PLs, even the ones that might be in this category today, don't necessarily have all these capabilities today. But I predict that over the course of the next 2-3 years, you will see those as part of their roadmap.
So you've dressed us from head to toe, from Allbirds to Warby Parker. I'm feeling good about myself. That's all really interesting. And I think if you look through the categories, heavy and bulky items is going to be solved because at some point someone is going to crack furniture. And I think when they do that, this type of solution really has a chance to grow into categories that maybe are as you said, are a little bit beyond it today. But look, maybe if we start getting to, you know, your summary around this, you've identified this fulfillment accelerator. Who's this right for, and what's the right kind of direction that the fulfillment accelerator should be taking?
Yeah, look, I think who is this right for is it's not right for the brand who's just starting out and is maybe only $1 million or $2 million a year of turnover. That it really goes beyond the small and medium business that is scaling beyond product market fit. They've figured out 1 or 2 major channels that are growing, sometimes over 50 to 100% year over year for a couple of years at a time. Now they're getting into 5, 6, 7,000 parcels a month. As you get into that range, you start to wonder like, hey, I'm going to hit 10K of parcels a month here pretty soon, maybe next year. And in the next few years, I'm going to be at 50,000 parcels a month before we know it. I can't manage this in spreadsheets and label generation software anymore. And so a lot of it starts with like, where are you coming from? And I think the fact is anyone in e-commerce, the first thing they do is set up a store and then they have label generation software, whether it's ShipStation, Shipping Easy, like any of these providers. They're all great, but they're not meant to manage a big warehouse, and then they're not meant to scale your business beyond 50,000 parcels. And I think that's something, solving people, process, technology together, adding more capabilities and a way for you to scale your costs. That's the pain that this company is, like, I would say any growing brand is working through, that they need to think about in the next couple of years.
And look, we're coming close to the end of this, but one of the things that you've been repeatedly talking about here is where this kind of makes a difference to your business. And the distinction I'm drawing from it is this shouldn't be measured in terms of ROI. It should be measured in terms of impact. So the minute you start making that transition, you start saving money, improving process. And some of these things are not measurable by their nature. So they don't have a metric controlling them. You just instinctively know that they're wrong, but you feel that kind of relief when you put them in there. And that's kind of my summary of some of the things that you've kind of brought me through this evening, Rick. And I don't know, is that impact word something that resonates with you?
Yeah, I think impact is a good point of view, because it's not just about being able to do something. It's being able to do things with high volume, high frequency to an excellent standard in a way that will flow through to your bottom line. Because it's one thing to be able to do something at any cost, but it's quite another to do things with increasing volume to higher standards in a way that flows through to your bottom line as you scale. And I think that last part is what a lot of direct consumer brands, frankly, didn't learn in the last 10 years. And they're taking a lot of lumps now, and they're kind of moving from the 80s bebop songs to now more like the Cure depressing soundtracks.
What about Friday I'm in Love? You've forgotten where you come from. Look, we've talked a lot. I want to jump in. I know there's been some questions coming through from people listening, so I just want to get to a couple of them. I'm just conscious of people's time as well. So give me just a minute. There's a couple here. So, would there ever be a time where ship from store is valuable? So high value items or heavy items. That's from John Elday.
Yeah, I think, first of all, you need to have a store footprint. Target, I would say, has really laid the roadmap for ship from store at scale. In fact, up until last year, they were probably one of the only retailers that shipped more than 90% of their items from store. And so ship from store is super valuable if, number one, your store is a differentiating asset, and you want people to walk into your store. You don't want just people to order online at all. And as people walk into your store, you want people to be able to pick up their items that they ordered online, reserve it in advance, and add to their cart as they do so. So heavy items, I think, are always interesting. Heavy bulky is, I don't care who you are, it's a challenging category. I think if you look at what some retailers like Lowe's and Home Depot have done with heavy bulky, they don't necessarily put so much stock in each stores. They actually have a sort of a regional hub for some of the heavy bulky items where they can ship it sort of same day, next day, because that might require installation or some other service situation. Amazon has a heavy bulky warehouse in the middle of the country, so they can sort of centralize all that inventory. And that's even with their regional network. They don't have a heavy bulky hub sort of into their new 8 region strategy. So I think that's where whether some of those items fit in. Ship from store is super valuable. I mean, number one is if it's close to the consumer you're shipping it from. That's really the simplest answer to your question.
No, thank you. And look, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to cut the question short at this point, Rick. But I just want to thank you for taking the time out to take us through this. I found it fascinating. I know you love it as well. But is there any closing messages you'd like to leave people with before we close down the live stream?
Yeah, I mean, look, at RMW Commerce, we work with a number of brands that are looking for supply chain fulfillment solutions. We have a number of partners that we work with. I wanted to thank ShipBob for helping commission this report and allow the team here at RMW Commerce to do research into the topic, to dive into what is different about the small and medium businesses as opposed to enterprises, and in particular for the focus of this report, the mid-market brands and retailers. They have different needs as they scale, and it's a challenging time because every day something's breaking because you're doing something right. And that's sort of one thing to keep in mind. Like, don't beat yourself up. Supply chain is hard for everyone. You're doing something right. I'm certainly here as a resource. If you want to bounce ideas, feel free to reach out to me, Rick at rmwcommerce.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. And really appreciate everyone listening in today.
You're on LinkedIn. I never knew that. I've been there loads and never come across you. One question did occur to me while you were saying that, Rick, and maybe a quick answer as we let people get back to their day. But were you surprised by the output of the report? Was it what you expected when you sat down to create it?
I think one of the things that surprised me was just the breadth of the challenges that a brand in this situation faces. It's actually quite a bit harder than I think the challenges than even the enterprise retailer has, because an enterprise retailer is usually much further along the maturity curve. You have a known volume, you have a known set of products, you're not changing as much. A mid-market SMB retailer is still kind of figuring out what their business is all about. But in between, you're like, you have some hits, like you're doing some things really well, but you're also growing so fast that every day you wake up, something new breaks. It's like, what's going to break today? And I think from a supply chain point of view, everything that breaks directly hits your bottom line. Missed shipments, out of stocks, cancellations, not being in the right channel, inventory not being close to the consumer. All those things not only hit your consumer experience, but they affect your bottom line. And so, you know, my final departing message is to seek out providers that are helping you, not just from a capability point of view, but also can speak your language for helping you on the bottom line as well.
That is solid advice. And I love the story you closed out with, Rick. That was fantastic. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for taking me through it.
All right. Thanks so much, Vinny. And thanks for you moderating through the session today. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Anytime. But thanks to everyone for tuning in. We're going to be ending the live stream now in just a moment. We'll be playing a replay of it for anyone that's been there, and all the contact details that Rick gave you are available. So we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thanks so much for tuning in. Goodbye.